It's always a bit of a head turner when you see established views start to shift, especially on big economic policy stuff.
Definitely.
And what's really caught my eye lately is seeing some, prominent voices, people who've generally supported Donald Trump, now questioning his latest tariff ideas, even criticizing them.
Right. And these aren't the expected critics, which makes it particularly interesting.
Exactly. It signals that maybe there's something about these specific proposals that's causing ripples, even within his own sort of base.
Yeah, it goes beyond the usual partisan lines, it seems.
So for this deep dive, we're looking beyond that typical back and forth. We've gathered, news articles, commentary from conservative figures and outlets, even some social media buzz from supportive groups, plus some financial takes.
Mm-hmm. Trying to get the full picture.
Yeah. Our mission here is really to understand these different reactions. Like, why are some longtime allies suddenly voicing doubts?
What are they actually worried about? The potential economic fallout, international relations, all of that.
We want to try and give you some clarity on what's a pretty complex and still unfolding issue.
By looking at it from all these different angles.
Okay, so let's jump in. The big story here, I think, is this kind of shifting landscape of support. It's not quite the united front we might expect on these tariffs.
Right. Some key figures who've been pretty solidly pro-Trump are now expressing, reservations.
Let's start with Ben Shapiro. He backed DeSantis initially, then came around to Trump. But he's been quite vocal on this tariff issue lately.
Yeah, Shapiro's recent comments are pretty telling. He was on the All In podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And he didn't really mince words, called the tariff claims contradictory.
Contradictory.
And said the rollout was about as bad a rollout as you could do.
Wow, okay. Strong words.
And he doubled down on YouTube, didn't he?
Yeah.
Taking aim at the basic idea that tariffs are just inherently good for the economy.
He did. He flat out called that wrong-headed and untrue. He also seemed really skeptical that tariffs would actually bring a flood of manufacturing back to the U.S.
Which is interesting. Coming from his, generally free market conservative viewpoint, he's hitting at the core economic argument often used for these kinds of tariffs.
Right. Questioning the fundamental logic.
Exactly.
Okay, then there's Dave Portnoy, Barstool Sports guy. He's been a loud Trump supporter since, 2016?
Yeah, very loyal. But he seems to be feeling the immediate effects of these tariff talks pretty personally.
How so?
Well, he talked publicly about the market dip right after the announcements. Said he lost millions.
Millions. Wow.
Initially reported around $7 million, but then he suggested it might be closer to $20 million. Said it was like 15% of his net worth potential.
Ouch. That's going to sting. But what was his take after losing that cash?
Well, that's the fascinating part. Even with that hit, he said he plans to roll with Trump.
Really?
Yeah, he said he thinks Trump's a smart guy playing a high-stakes game.
So his political loyalty sort of trumps the financial pain, maybe?
It looks that way. It really highlights this potential clash, doesn't it? Between political alignment and, your wallet. Portnoy sees the hit, but frames it as part of a bigger plan he trusts.
Interesting tension there. We might see more of that.
Could be.
Okay, let's talk Joe Rogan, another huge voice. Endorsed Trump before. Went to the inauguration, but his position seems to be shifting a bit.
Yeah, it does seem like he's become more critical on certain things. Earlier this year, he called Trump's tariff fight with Canada stupid.
Stupid.
Okay. And he even mentioned how Canadians were booing the U.S. at games because of it.
Huh. And he's disagreed on other stuff, too, recently, right? Like deportations.
Exactly. He's voiced disagreement on that as well.
So it seems like even with past support, he's not afraid to call out policies he doesn't like.
It suggests there's maybe a growing group of former backers who are becoming more, let's say, selective in their support.
Not a total break, but definitely questioning specific policies.
Precisely.
All right, moving into the finance world. Bill Ackman, big hedge fund manager, openly backed Trump. But he's sounding some pretty loud alarms about these tariffs.
Very loud alarms.
Yeah,
especially given his pro-Trump stance. He warned on X, formerly Twitter, about a potential self-induced economic nuclear winter.
Nuclear winter? That's dramatic.
Extremely. He said if Trump isn't more careful, fully activating these tariffs could be like economic nuclear war. Coming from him, that's significant.
He walked back some criticism of Commerce Secretary Lutnick, right? but stuck to his guns on the policy itself.
Yeah, he apologized for the personal comment about Lutnick, but immediately restated his worry about a major policy error that could basically wreck recent economic gains.
So that initial strong reaction, even with the apology, shows just how worried some in finance are, even the supportive ones.
Absolutely. It underlines the level of anxiety.
And then Elon Musk, billionaire, advisor to Trump. You'd think he'd be on board, but nope. Reservations there, too.
Musk's main issue seems to be cost increases for Tesla. He said tariffs would do that.
Makes sense for his business.
Right. And he's actually pushed for the opposite, a zero tariff situation between Europe and North America. Basically, free trade, at least for his key markets.
Which didn't go over well with everyone in Trump's circle. Peter Navarro, the former trade advisor.
Right. Navarro basically said Musk doesn't understand trade.
And Musk's response?
Pretty direct. Called Navarro truly a moron and dumber than a sack of bricks.
Okay, so definitely some friction and different economic views even within that advisory group.
Clearly, Musk's global business perspective clashes pretty hard with a more protectionist view.
We're also hearing whispers of opposition from some Republicans in Congress, though our sources weren't super specific on names there.
But the fact that it's being mentioned that some in his own party are uneasy, that's another sign these tariffs aren't getting universal applause, even on the right.
And finally, on this shifting support theme, let's look at the grassroots level. Discussions on the Our Conservative subreddit about that proposed 100% tariff on foreign films.
Oh yeah, that thread was revealing. A lot of uncertainty, actually. People asking how that would even work and why.
Practical questions.
Definitely. And big worries about retaliation. You know, the U.S. film industry makes a ton of money overseas. What if other countries hit back?
Good point. Could really hurt Hollywood's bottom line.
Exactly. There were also doubts about whether Trump even has the legal power to just slap on a tariff like that.
Constitutional questions.
Right. Some wondered if it was even serious or just like trolling. And people debated the fairness, does this actually help Americans or is it just about hurting other countries? One person even said Congress should be the one setting tariffs.
So even in a generally pro-Trump space online, you see real critical thinking, lots of questions about the practicality, the legality, the consequences.
It shows it's not just blind agreement, even among supporters. There's real engagement and concern.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of the skepticism and criticism, but it's important to say not everyone is against these tariffs. Some sources defend them.
Right, there are arguments for them. And one interesting angle is this idea of austerity as a sort of justification. That came up in the American Conservative.
Austerity? How does that connect to tariffs?
Well, the article mentions a comment Trump made. Something about kids maybe having 2 dolls instead of 30.
Okay, like prices go up, people buy less.
Exactly. But the author interprets that not as a bad thing, but maybe as like an endorsement of moderation. Less consumption.
So fewer cheap imports might mean what? People buy fewer things overall. Or maybe shift to domestic goods.
Or maybe invest in better quality, longer-lasting stuff. The idea connects to this notion that maybe we should tolerate mildly straightened economic circumstances if it means getting fair trade deals in the long run.
Like a collective sacrifice for a bigger goal.
Kind of. The author even talks about their own philosophy buying fewer, more durable things and suggests tariffs could, maybe accidentally, encourage that sort of thriftiness.
Bringing back thrift. Interesting framing.
Yeah, they even mentioned John Updike talking about doing without during the '08 crisis.
Yeah.
It's a philosophical take, suggesting a potential societal benefit beyond just the dollars and cents.
So turning potential price hikes into a virtue, almost.
It's certainly a different perspective on the potential consequences. Less about pure economics, more about values and habits.
Okay, but let's swing back to those more widespread worries, the big economic anxieties that keep cropping up in the sources.
Yeah, the potential downsides are a major theme. That Heritage Foundation analyst we mentioned warned things could get quite grim.
Grim how?
Like returning to protectionism levels we haven't seen in 100 years, risking recession, high inflation, the works.
And they worried it could actually hurt Trump's other goals.
Yeah, like border security or tax cuts.
Yeah.
If the economy tanks because of tariffs, it could undermine everything else and potentially hit his own base the hardest.
Right. And didn't that analyst also criticize the list itself, pointing out some oddities?
Oh, yeah. They called out incompetence, mentioning the inclusion of uninhabited islands, like Heard and McDonnell Islands.
Seriously.
And even a U.S. military base, the British Indian Ocean Territory, which raises questions about how carefully the list was put together.
And yeah, that doesn't exactly inspire confidence.
And remember the Reddit thread? Some users there linked the recent economic slowdown, that small contraction in the first quarter, partly to tariffs already in place.
So a feeling that this isn't just theoretical, it might already be happening.
And that AEI op-ed, they went even further, called the proposed tariffs an economic emergency.
Emergency. Why?
They argued these could be worse than the Smoot-Hawley tariffs back in the Depression era, said it's potentially the biggest tax hike since 1968 and would almost certainly lead to retaliation and recession.
So putting it all together, the list of potential economic harms is pretty long.
It is. We're talking potential damage to real wage growth, basically. Your paycheck doesn't go as far.
Because stuff costs more.
Exactly. Plus, risks of job losses, hits to retirement savings, businesses pulling back on investment, lower exports, stock market drops.
And higher costs for companies, like we heard from Musk with Tesla, or, say, robotics makers. Even toy shortages were mentioned.
Right. And circling back to that 100% tariff on foreign films, the worry isn't just pricier movie tickets for us.
It's the retaliation hitting U.S. studios' foreign profits.
Precisely. That could really damage a major U.S. export industry and maybe even discourage making films here if foreign markets shrink. Plus, the practical issue of how you even apply that tariff fairly to things like licensing deals, it gets messy.
Okay, so lots of economic red flags being raised, but there's the other side, right? The argument that these tariffs aren't just about economics, they're a tool.
Yes, the counter-argument is that they're being used strategically for diplomatic goals, for an America First agenda, things beyond just trade balances.
And the Heritage Foundation commentary pushed this idea.
They did. Argued that targeted tariffs have been successful in achieving those broader goals.
Like with Mexico and Canada on immigration.
Exactly. They point to how both countries apparently responded favorably and fast when Trump threatened tariffs over illegal border crossings. Trudeau even flew down to Florida.
And Canada supposedly committed more money to border security because of it.
That was the report, yeah.
Right.
An extra $1.3 billion. So the argument is tariffs give the president leverage, a tool he can use quickly without waiting for Congress.
And there's this idea that trade policy is becoming about values, not just commerce.
Right. Suggesting things like, say, censorship concerns in the UK could influence trade decisions now.
Right.
It broadens the scope of what trade policy is for.
The Heritage piece also argued that foreign producers often eat some of the cost, right? Through exchange rates.
Yeah, the idea is if the dollar gets stronger relative to another currency, it can offset part of the tariff cost for the U.S. buyer. They also brought up history.
Linking high tariffs to past U.S. growth.
Suggesting there were periods when high tariffs helped fund the government during strong economic times. The core idea is tariffs can level the playing field against countries using unfair tactics or old tariff rules.
And when you combine tariffs with other domestic policies, it can make U.S. production more competitive.
That's the rationale. Plus, the argument that tariffs can help tackle the trade deficit and maybe even protect the dollar's global standing. So it's presented as a much broader strategic play.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, it's just incredibly clear how complex this whole tariff debate is. So many different viewpoints.
Absolutely.
For me, the really striking thing is seeing these significant vocal concerns coming from within Trump's own base of support. That feels like the key takeaway.
I agree. The big points of conflict really seem to be, one, the potential economic harm to U.S. businesses and consumers versus the claimed benefits.
Two, the real questions about how these tariffs would actually be implemented, the competence factor.
And three, this fundamental debate over whether using tariffs as a strategic or diplomatic weapon justifies the potential economic cost.
It definitely leaves you thinking about the long-term picture, doesn't it? What these disagreements mean for the future of U.S. trade policy, our place in the world economy. Maybe it's worth digging deeper into the basic economics of tariffs or looking back at history, see what past trade disputes can teach us today. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive.